All right, here we go. It's a joy to be with you here today on the Leader Site Show. I'm Eric Thompson. I'm the principal at Thompson Leadership Development, and it is my joy to talk about fascinating topics with really smart people who are creative and have good hearts and who have accomplished a lot. And we're going to do that today. The art of mentoring fascinates me. I do not consider myself to know everything about this art, and I'm an explorer. I want to learn more about the art of mentoring because mentoring is incredibly important. We all know that if we want to advance good things in the world, it's good to have amazing mentors. People need mentoring. And so if I find somebody who I think is particularly good at it, I like to talk to them and find out what are their tricks, what are their tools, what are their superpowers. And we're going to do that today on the Leader Site Show. As you know, my tagline, some of you have been on this before, is seeking to provide you with insight, foresight, and some 20/20 hindsight, which sometimes is the best kind of sight. And in order to tell you about why I chose my guest today, Elizabeth Azari, I have to tell you a little bit about how I met her. So let's see here. So I have this course. It's called Leading by Managing Self. It's a year-long journey that I go through with intact teams within the businesses that I try to serve. And in the course, I get to know people quite well. It's an extraordinarily intimate inward journey to discover what is my growth opportunity as a leader. And I love this. I love it. And I get to know the people in the course quite well. So in the organization that my guest Elizabeth Azari works in, I'm going to tell you more about her bio in a second, which is called NBME. They're an organization that creates products that certify doctors, for one, and other groups in America and across the world. And I've been on a journey with them for like 4 years now. I've done 4 different versions of my course. Okay. So before I really met Elizabeth, I had a course with other people in the company and her name kept coming up. So in these conversations, I'm getting to know people and, I'm saying things like, well, what's your wisdom network? When it comes to the journey of learning to be a leader, who are the people you love talking to? Well, Elizabeth Azari. Her name came up a lot. Kind of striking how many times, Elizabeth, people said your name. So, and I was getting to know Elizabeth at the same time, but I just have to tell you, this is a striking thing that lots of people were saying her name. So, there's other people at the organization. I actually would like to shout out to Mike Jodwin, who's not on this call, but he's another one whose name comes up a lot. So that just gives you some of the background data as to why I wanted to interview Elizabeth. And after hearing her name quite a bit and I got to know her better, I discovered for myself, how much wisdom she has. And I think we're going to give a chance for you to have a taste of that, including some writing that she's been doing before we finish this conversation today. So welcome, Elizabeth Azari. I think you're muted.
Oh, sorry, the other headset unmute didn't work, but hi, everybody. It's great to see you. And thank you, Eric, for this opportunity. It's great. I have to say I'm a little humbled because I've been to the other sessions and not sure I belong here, but thank you very, very much.
Well, thank you. And I do want to welcome anybody who's on. You can unmute yourself and not unmute yourself, but turn your video on. It's nice to see the faces while we discuss. You obviously don't have to do that. So the basic plan here is to talk for about half an hour about the art of mentoring, and I'm just so looking forward to this, Elizabeth.
Well,
Thanks
I
for,
know I'm in for a wild ride with you, Eric. I'm ready.
what's a good topic, isn't it?
It is.
Did you
It's
have,
great.
like, who was an amazing mentor that you had in the past before you worked at the NBME?
Ah, yeah, great. Thank you for that. So before I worked at NBME and right out of college, I worked at Travelers Insurance Company as a computer programmer back in the COBOL Fortran days.
Okay.
The leader of the team there was one of the few women in that field at the time.
Hmm.
And she was a sort of she was a mentor by me watching how she operated in that environment. So I would say that was a first maybe informal mentor in the working world in that way. When I went back to school later on to law school and then joined a large firm in Philadelphia as a litigator, I had two terrific mentors, both of whom happened to be men, two partners that I worked for really at the time. And they were, they just wanted to push you as far as you could go. And they did it by providing opportunity, and they did it by providing feedback, and they did it just by having incredible confidence in anything that we could do. And so I found that to be, from people who have been practicing for a long time, an incredible vote of confidence. And to this day, I'm still in touch with them to this day.
These relationships are precious, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
One of my
They
favorite
really are.
bosses I ever had, Elizabeth, it was an interesting situation. I had this one boss and I was working for him, and I'd go to my whatever bi-monthly one-to-ones, and he would sort of talk the whole time, and I was kind of listening, and just I never found him that interesting after a while. And then I switched, and he left, he got promoted, and I got a different boss. And this other boss, he handled these conversations completely differently. He would be like, "So Eric, what's your best idea about how we should change things here?" And I was like so lit up by it, I couldn't believe it.
Mhm.
Uh, and he had such a different style. So I just remembered that when you said this thing about faith in them, faith in you that they expressed and showed through mentoring.
Absolutely. And I think you just demonstrated through good questions. Good questions. Very important.
Mhm. You want to tell me a little bit about that? Have you gone on
It
a
did.
journey on the art of learning to ask great questions?
Well, your course helped, I'll say that. Your course did help in that regard. So first of all, as an attorney, in particular a litigation attorney, you do learn how to ask questions.
Uh-huh.
And oftentimes you're trying to elicit facts, but you're also trying to get to an outcome.
Mhm.
In this kind of question scenario, you're trying to better understand the person, better understand the challenges that the person has,
Mhm.
and then sense. I know that sounds like an odd thing to say for somebody as analytical as I can be, but to sense into it and see what is needed at the moment.
Mhm.
To help that person blossom. And I think about it as helping a person blossom. They have it, they just need to uncover it.
Yeah.
So the questions get to things that they can then ask of themselves
Mhm.
beyond whatever the moment is that we happen to be interacting, to
Yeah.
find some insight themselves and can help them. And so opportunities to be able to put something forth
Mhm.
and and ask a question that may open the door. It may not, but it may.
Yeah.
um, I think is pretty powerful. And I can tell you, mentoring to me is quite bi-directional.
Mhm.
I'm thinking right now of one-to-ones that I have with numerous people at NBME and outside, and those are very intimate in the sense that they're one-to-one. And oftentimes I find myself saying, "Hey, oh, that's great. Let me bounce this off you." And it becomes bi-directional. I do learn through every single interaction,
Mhm.
every single one.
Mhm.
And that can happen in one-to-many as well. But I just find it fascinating how one sentence can trigger a whole host of thoughts that will follow me for weeks. So as much as, maybe they like it, I really love it.
I think that awesome boss I was just telling you about wasn't afraid to show me that he didn't know everything.
Mm,
And he would bring me into his puzzles, kind of
mhm.
like you might be doing. So just to note, so Elizabeth's already told us, she's a litigator, trained as a lawyer, and has your career's been great. I mean, you got this C-suite job in a historic institution. The NBME has been around for a long time, doing really good things, has survived for a long time. You're the chief operating officer. You're a grounded, down-to-earth person, and you just use the word intimacy to describe part of the work you do. I think that's interesting. Can you talk a little about this? What about intimacy in the workplace? Isn't that a weird word? Is it an off-topic word? Is that a taboo? What do you think about that?
Well, I can't wait to hear what other people think about it. I could tell you, Eric, that part of the journey, particularly over the last maybe 10 years or less, was a big one to get to that word. It was
Wow.
a big one. So as a woman in the fields that I just described, and also just in the time period that I was growing up, vulnerability was really something that you didn't want to show.
Yeah.
It was very important to be put together, pulled together. But
Okay.
analytical helps,
You helped us
um,
do that.
right? And to develop that persona, um,
Hmm.
that gets you pretty far in the workplace, and not demonstrate a lot of emotion, not demonstrate a lot of those
Wow.
pieces of a person that maybe is very powerful part of yourself, but was seen as a potentially a weakness. At least that's what the socialization was. And
Right.
then at one point at NBME, I learned otherwise. I learned it through a couple of women that I was working very closely with. They happened to be consultants working for the organization, but at one point, they kind of said, "Why aren't you showing this side of yourself?" Because I was showing it to them because it was safe. And I told them why, and I told them basically what I said to you, and they said, "Yeah, you're kind of missing your superpower.
Wow.
It would be great. Let's see what happens if you try this."
Wow.
And for the NBMEers on this particular session, they'll know who I'm talking about. It was very
Talking
powerful.
about Liz and Marie of Insight.
I'm talking about Liz and Marie of Insight.
Wonderful business. INSYTE. If you're out there
That's
looking for
correct.
amazing consultants. It's
Yes.
interesting because I met you after you met them, so I never knew the pre. But can I ask you something? I want to ask you more about this, what you just shared, but I want to ask like the sort of skeptical question, like, do you think that some people who haven't learned the persona enough and need to learn it more? Or, so was that critical for you to go through that phase of, what do you think about that?
That's a great question. I think it was critical for me to be able to learn that skill. Yes.
Okay.
And I think I could have learned the rest of it sooner
Okay.
had I had the right mentor.
Wow.
Yes. Or had I been more self-aware.
Yeah.
So the answer is yes. I mean, obviously you have to use your skills. That too much of one spice, too little of another doesn't really work so well. But finding out how this blend can work is part of a life journey. It's part of a career journey.
Yeah.
And that's the fun of talking with different people, because every person's going to approach it differently.
Yeah.
And what is that little bit of sometimes it's just a little fine tuning. Sometimes people need to toss out the recipe and start again.
Well, we're obviously talking to a lifelong learner here. Uh, Tell me about this now. I'm gonna ask you another one about this. So you learn to not hide this aspect of yourself. Did that make you more productive as a leader? Or did it just make work more fun?
It was scary.
Hmm.
It was scary at first. Are you,
Really?
you know, so you sure,
What, like
absolutely.
how? What were you afraid of?
I didn't know how people would receive it. That was new. That was
Yeah,
a very new thing.
top perspective.
Very new perspective, right? So,
Lose,
um,
were you worried that you might lose respect? That people might.
potentially at the time I was the only female on the team, on the senior team. That
And
is no longer the
I
case.
want to just really acknowledge this female part you're bringing out. You know, me being a guy, that just, I hear you. You know that that could be a part of it. That traditional qualities that might be viewed as feminine, like intimacy, or maybe you could even tell me what are those qualities that maybe have been traditionally branded as weak or as not appropriate for C-suite or
Mm,
whatever. You know.
mm, right. You know, I think terminology alone is part of an issue. So, what do we talk about when we talk about people skills? What do people call them? Soft skills.
Yeah.
And I think of them as critical skills.
Mhm.
I prefer that term. So they're not technical skills necessarily, but they're critical skills. But they're thought of as soft skills.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
I think of it just from that perspective of how things have been. So I don't want to focus it on the female thing, but I would say that.
And
Um,
go ahead, do it.
but right, and vulnerability can be hard for anyone,
Mm.
really hard. And it's how much do you demonstrate at what
Yeah.
time, what's appropriate. Um, and but what it really gets down to is showing your human side, being human, because people are bringing themselves to work. People are bringing their whole selves to work. You want people to bring their whole selves to work. So to go back to your other question about did it make you more productive or was it more fun? I think it's both. I think it's both. And so, as opposed to being turning on that one side that you have, you know, how you talk about your strong hand and the weaker hand.
Yeah.
So you get to develop a little bit more of what you had suppressed, and it becomes a stronger portion of your hand, and it's just very balanced.
Did your strong hand, your sort of hard-nosed litigator strong hand, did it atrophy as a part
No,
of this journey? Or did it,
no.
what would you say? What happened to it?
Um, I channeled it. I channel it, especially when I need to channel it in a different way. So if I have to, you know, have a confrontation, or if there's something that really requires, you know, a very tough negotiation,
Yeah.
I channel it. But you know, I use that like I would use salt.
Hmm.
You don't want to just overdo it. So it's there. Sometimes it surprises people, but it's not something, it's a conscious decision. It's a consciousness. It's
Yeah.
a tool in the toolkit.
Interesting. Yeah.
It's still there.
Yeah. Using it in the
Mhm.
right place. I just want to say, you know, I'm so excited about the 21st century. I really am. And I think the business world is evolving in beautiful ways. And you know, this is how I look at it, Elizabeth. If you look at like a 200-year story of how businesses evolve, we went through this transition from you know, industrial economy to knowledge economy. And so we have these knowledge workers now all over the US, and increasingly knowledge, the knowledge jobs are expanding, and there's going to be more of them. Um, and knowledge workers, I think the leadership of knowledge workers is an evolving game. And some of the things you just said, that whole self, knowledge workers are prized if they're creative. And to be creative, whole self is important. The other thing that's really important for creative teams is trust.
Mm-hmm.
Trust to make a mistake, trust to try something different. Innovators have to try different things that haven't been tested. So some of these qualities you're describing, I believe, are, you know, part of the emerging critical skill set needed for people who are leaders of knowledge teams. What do you think about that?
I completely agree. I also think they're critical skills for members of teams.
Mhm.
because those teams tend to be flatter and more collaborative. So I think that the things we're talking about are things that have to they'll become more common competencies, I would think, within the workforce.
I really see that happening. Do you?
Mhm.
Yeah.
I do, and yet it doesn't mean people don't need some help along the way,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Help along the way, and we're all learning. We're all learning all the time. We're all on the journey. I mean, the day I stop learning, I think
Yeah.
it's over.
Well, that's the other thing about it, is in the knowledge economy, learning is critical in the organization to be learning and changing and evolving. And so, you said vulnerability early, and I think vulnerability is a feature of learning. I remember sitting in certain learning situations where I thought, I don't even know the language they're speaking right here. A friend of mine went back and learned complex systems theory, which is super geeky. And she told me for 2 years, she went to conferences and felt she didn't even know the language.
Wow.
But she hung in there. And by the third year, she was part of the conversation. 10 years later, she's an expert in something she didn't know anything about before. So that vulnerability dimension, I mean, it's hard sometimes to sit there and be like, I'm the awkward one now. I'm the geeky one. I'm the dorky one, who's drooling and doesn't know what to say.
I really love that. I think it's something that as adults, it can be hard to do. As children, it's very easy. If you think about even learning a second language, if you learn it, you have to learn the ABCs. You have to you have to be at a very beginner level before you can advance. That requires that openness and ability to say, yeah, there's something I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
know. But I know how to find out, or I know that I'll learn it, or name it. Oh, by the way, and I might need some help.
Yeah. Help.
Right?
Help. Don't ask for help, Elizabeth. Never ask for help.
That's another lesson that I had to learn.
Did you really?
Yeah.
You had to learn that.
I grew up in New England. I grew up in the pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of thing. And it was very much, yes, you yourself need to be able to do things. And that's fine to a degree, but doesn't lend itself to asking for help or reaching out for help.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking of just even being able to breathe in the unknowing. Just wait, like my friend did. Wait 2 years, just keep breathing. It's okay.
Right.
It's you're learning. But do you see like a range? Let's talk about I'm so interested in how you assess leadership talent. And I think you've laid down a number of things here that maybe we would want to be better at measuring or even just sensing and knowing in people, that they have a tremendous capacity to learn, or they have a good capacity to be effectively vulnerable in the right situation. What do you think about that? I don't know, just I'll make it as open-ended as can be. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Again, I'd love to hear what everyone, my colleagues on this in this session would say. I agree with that. I also think so. You look for potential, right? Potential. And the potential includes curiosity. And the potential includes, yes, that ability to take things in and learn from them, kind of play with it a little bit. I'm thinking of Jonathan Rubright's talk and how, he talked about kind of taking things in and playing with it and experimenting. There's an element of
excuse me for one sec, shameless promotion. She's referring to my YouTube channel and the recordings of my interviews with people in this leadership space, including this guy, Jonathan Rubright, who we had an interesting interview, and then he interviewed me. So those are both on my YouTube channel. If you go to my website, thompsonleadershipdevelopment.com or thompsonleadership.com, one of the buttons is the LeaderSite YouTube channel, or you can just find it on YouTube. So yeah, you were saying,
yeah, it's the ability to take things, think about them over time, ask some questions, come back. If you have a mentor, come back, talk to your mentor. Here's what I'm thinking about. And the other thing I think is discerning, being able to discern. So aside from making decisions, which also requires discernment, discern how, read the room, how are people doing, which has been a true challenge during our two-dimensional lives that we've been in for over a year.
Yeah.
Right. I can't walk into a room and discern what my division it feels like right now. I
This is
can't.
part of how you discern is by reading people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I
You know,
try to
I'm
listen.
thinking about social intelligence. So, IQ, people talk about EQ, emotional intelligence. I'm not sure they talk as much about SQ. I'm not even sure if it's a term,
Mm.
but social intelligence, reading people, is I think very, very important in excellent decision making. And you just talked about it there, and I'll throw this in too, that I think people who are very good at that are going to be even more critical in the coming continuation of our not meeting in person teams.
Yeah, it's certainly a challenge. For some folks, it's easier, or so they say, right? And for others, it's more challenging. I think it requires kind of fine-tuning your skills to deal with this situation, whatever this situation is. But
Yeah,
it's very tough with a large room
yeah.
and not being able to see faces and not being able to feel the electricity in the room.
Mhm.
Um, it's you're missing in a sense, you're missing some data. And so you have to rely on some other tools.
Like what?
Well, 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 I sort of fell into it or backed into it, but when we were thrust into this situation last year, I was struggling with how do I do all staff meetings, or how do I do meaningful things that might be communicating with people in a new way. So I started to write to the team, to my division, and also to shared with other people in the organization,
Mm.
almost on a weekly basis, but usually at least twice every 2 weeks.
Yeah. Well, we're going to hear one of these, right? So Elizabeth and I teed this up. So we're moving towards a breakout opportunity here for you guys. And you know what? I feel like, Elizabeth, what we just talked about for 25 minutes, and we could keep going for easy another hour. There's a lot in there, a lot in there. So in about a few minutes here, I'm going to give you all an opportunity to just keep going on this. As Elizabeth said a number of times, she's interested in what you're thinking. So I'm going to give you a chance to warm that up by being in a breakout room together and just talking about this whole art of mentoring and explore it for yourself. How do you want to be a better mentor? And then there's a whole other side of it is, how do you get a mentor? How do you become one of the people Elizabeth talks to, or whoever it is you do talk to? One thing I'm thinking about, Elizabeth, is because I think you create a space in these conversations for people to bring your whole self, as you said, you're probably getting data points that helps you read rooms, because later down the road, you're in a room with, they're one of the people in the room, and maybe their perceptive capacities are more available to you now because you've created a channel, where they're trusting you and you trust them. And it just expands social intelligence, sort of one relationship at a time. And I think it's probably also a place, the mentoring space you create, where their intelligence wakes up and can thrive and be alive, in the workplace, in that hour, and then they bring that with them and take that with them to other conversations. So and we talked about, so Elizabeth has shared some of her writing with me, and I do think it's really valuable stuff. And just to highlight the connection to vulnerability, I think you will see in the piece she's about to read here, it's a 3-minute piece, you'll see this sort of flowering, as you used the metaphor earlier, Elizabeth, of the ability to be vulnerable from the seat you sit in at the top of the organization on the senior executive team.
All right. Well, thank you, Eric. Thanks for that opportunity. And as I say, this was just trying to sense from people, from their from my one-to-one conversations, I started to realize there were some commonalities in things that they were saying that I was feeling or experiencing, and I thought it might be true of others. And so the goal was connection, and the goal was to help people that I can imagine in my mind's eye sitting in their apartment by themselves, kind of isolated in COVID, or struggling to educate their children online, in a way that they never had to before, or people who couldn't be with each other in the ways that they wanted to be, was hitting people across the spectrum. So I figured everybody was being touched in some way, shape, or form.
So
So this is a
one way you adapted to
Mhm.
lead in the pandemic
To
and
try to lead in a
environment.
pandemic. Yep.
Okay.
Even with the business challenges, the human challenges were even greater. So
Mhm.
this piece I wrote a while ago called "Abide a While,"
Mhm.
a message from me to you, dear colleagues. I'm writing to you on Sunday rather than Friday for several reasons, but only one that matters. I could tell you that I did not have enough space in my week to write until now, which is true. I could tell you that I was worn out from some very long weeks, which is also true. But the most important reason is this. I found that I could not be authentic in what I had originally intended to write. In fact, I couldn't write at all. My heart simply wasn't in it. I was experiencing a deep sense of loss, even though what I had lost this week was simply a short visit with my son, daughter-in-law, and my 4-year-old granddaughter, which would have occurred this weekend if the pandemic had not. It has been 9 months since I've hugged them, and this was the third missed opportunity. This loss was not on the scale of what many of you have experienced. I know that our family's separation is temporary, unlike what some of you have endured. But that knowledge did not keep sadness, frustration, and weariness from creeping in, no matter how much I tried to lock them out. Sadness, frustration, and weariness came upon me at a most inconvenient time. Is there ever a convenient time for their arrival? I sometimes poke around in a little shop called Abide a While. It's filled with plants and gardening equipment and a few freeloading birds, with handcrafted jewelry and soaps and little surprises tucked away in corners ready to be treasured. As the name suggests, it's a welcoming place where anyone can wander leisurely indoors and out, admiring the flora and local workmanship. And yet, there is no place to sit, only the space to roam about for a little while. No one working in the shop knows who will come in or how their guests will behave. Will they be cheerful, charming, brooding, brusque, hurried, relaxed, demanding, or peaceful? I'm sure they've encountered all of those and more, but at least their guests were invited. I did not invite sadness, frustration, disappointment, or weariness to wander in. They simply appeared on my threshold as unannounced and uninvited visitors. They insisted on staying rather than passing by. At first, I did not see them as uninvited guests. I saw them as intruders. And that made me angry, which added some spice to the stew of mixed sensations that was already simmering beneath my surface. I tried ignoring them, denying them, pushing them away, and silently bargaining with them. Their timing was terrible, and I wanted nothing of them. They would not listen. After a while, I realized that I could either fight them or have the grace to accept them, perhaps even welcome them in. And so I opened up some space in the day's plans and let sadness, frustration, and their friends abide a while, as if they were unexpected guests who were not of my choosing, but who deserve some graciousness nonetheless. I gave them most of my Saturday to stay and tell me their absurd and exaggerated stories. Becoming still, I let them have some space and some grace. All 4 guests knew that they had until morning to make their exit, and apparently, all 4 found their way out in the stealth of night after I had dozed off. Had I continued to reject them, I do believe they would have prolonged their visit. In abiding them, I had actually given myself the gifts of space and grace. If you sometimes find similar unwanted visitors at your threshold, I hope that you will be able to abide them a while and not let them overstay their welcome. In allowing them to stop and then pass through, you may be giving yourself the very gifts you need. Wishing you the many gifts that life has to offer, Elizabeth.
Oh, thank you for reading that.
You're welcome.
Okay, I'm going to use the breakout function in Zoom to give you an opportunity to talk a little about, by the way, there's the course and some of the wonderful
Oh,
people
yeah.
had in the course at the national, at the NBME course I was mentioning earlier. And so I'm going to give you folks on the call now, about 10 minutes to talk about this. Here's some questions you might consider. I wonder what we all have opportunities to be mentors and also to be mentored, to ask for mentoring. In fact, I'll say one thing about the process of getting a mentor. One word: ask.
Ask.
An ancient tradition. A lot of people don't know that you need that from them. And they might not even know that you would even consider them a mentor. So I'm going to give you a chance, and then we'll come back together and give you, and we'll have a conversation. You can ask Elizabeth questions or share some of her thoughts with some of your thoughts with her. Here's some suggestions on how to conduct the breakout. The time is going to fly by. So if somebody starts and takes the lead and says, hey, here's what I'm thinking about. I really liked what she said about this, or, I'm not sure about what she said about that, or what Eric said. If somebody just jumps in and starts doing that, and then, the others will do it too. And before you know it, I'll be using Zoom to call you back here to continue our conversation. So. Hey, welcome back. Wow, look at that.
Yay.
Who is that young lady on this call? What is your name, young lady?
Finley.
Hi, Finley.
Amber, I think that's some COVID screen meeting leadership right there. Is bringing a little bundle of joy with you.
Well, oftentimes we just go with the flow, don't we?
It's good to see people from a lot of different places in my world all here together. How was your breakouts? I would love to just, anybody want to get in? What are you thinking about? What has this conversation stimulated in you? What's your wisdom or your question? Just unmute yourself and start talking if you feel like it, or raise your hand.
Hi, I have a question. We were talking about how I could ask for a mentor, and I need a mentor, and our mentors in some places, I think there are paid mentors, and some places it's a gift from the person. Also, I was wondering, Elizabeth, how you define the difference between a mentor and a coach.
So thank you, Lisa. I don't know what your organization situation is, but in ours, it isn't a paid thing. And it's certainly very organic in our organization right now. Asking, I think when Eric said just ask, find someone, I would say find someone's plural. I don't think any one person can just be it for for any one person. I think getting multiple people and just asking, hey, I'd love to learn from you. Could I have some time with you periodically without even using the mentor word, can go pretty far. The way I think of mentoring and coaching, they go hand in hand, but I think of mentoring as perhaps a little bit broader in some sense. I think about it as helping somebody for their life skill. It's not just developing into, say, a role, but rather what are the tools that they need to sharpen or get that will help them in the workplace and beyond. I think coaching can do similar things, but I tend to think of that as a little bit myself, my own definition, as being a little bit more narrow toward a particular goal, and honing a particular thing, whereas mentoring to me is broader and perhaps a longer lasting relationship.
I love what you said, Elizabeth, about the two-way. I think that's a great point for the art of being a mentor, is to lean into that and let it be two-way. So thanks to you for question, Lisa. Anybody else? Question or comment or thought or wisdom?
Elizabeth, I think something we were talking about was an appreciation for bringing that humanity to your leadership, and wondering how you see others learning from you at that level where for so long maybe people have been conditioned to not show that at a C-suite or leadership level, and how are you passing that on to your peers?
Wow. Well, what I can say about our leadership team is it's a great team. It's a great team, and we have a great leader who also himself demonstrates humanity in the way he comes across to the entire organization, whether in person, in video, or whatever. So let me just start with that exists, and thank you for that. I think because of that, it makes life a lot easier. I also would say, though, that it's maybe more challenging a little further into the organization for the people who are trying to move up into successive kinds of positions of authority. How do you balance the being able to have authority with that humanity? Things that I've talked about with folks, and they can go hand in hand. So I think the challenge is really further into the organization, where I see it. And then you just develop peers at that level who can mentor each other. Frankly, that's the best of all possible worlds, is that you develop a network of people who then help each other and others.
I think that would be one of the features of an excellent learning organization, that there's just lots of rich learning relationships happening at every level, peers, up, down, sideways. And you said something, Elizabeth, I want to ask here about authority, higher levels of authority. I think it's an interesting contrast, vulnerability and authority, or humanity and authority. And I think you probably coach people on authority, on building more authority, like I do. Many of my clients actually have learned the humanity thing more fully than the authority thing. And they have to learn the authority thing, which is another feature of humanity, by the way, because it takes guts. But what are your thoughts on learning authority?
My thoughts are that oftentimes people are afraid of it. So they may be put in a position of authority and they're afraid of it, or they don't understand what it means. And so they may confuse authority with power. And they may overuse certain aspects of it, and others may shy away. So the people that I tend to end up talking with, maybe 80% of them have been shying away from it and need to learn how to lean into it and kind of take that stance and learn how to get comfortable with that. 20% were the more overbearing, and I mentor men and women. Some were very overbearing and needed to learn how to stop that part, or at least temper that part, and get to the this is probably going to get you a little further if you start to try this. Very, very interesting to see that difference, and see how ineffective both can be. That's the thing.
Mhm.
So growing into one's authority, I think, gracefully
Mm.
can go a long way.
Yeah, I love this term, poised authority,
Hmm.
which is a challenge. I'd love to hear other thoughts. What's your wisdom on this topic of mentoring and getting mentored and having a great mentor, and or questions? What are you thinking about? I like the pause. It's good.
Our group talked a little bit about vulnerability, and we're talking about the importance of vulnerability after you mentioned that, Elizabeth, and how to be vulnerable. It's important to know your context and the politics and the culture, but also being vulnerable helps you be more your authentic self. And isn't that what we're all growing into? And if we are growing into that, won't that enable us to find our deeper gifts and to, we like the word blossom, and to blossom.
I love that. And I like your phrase, find our deeper gifts. That's exactly it. That's exactly it. And we were talking in our small group about, we look like we're fully flowered human beings when we're adults, and we probably aren't, and maybe we're not until the very last day. Who knows? But it's just that find your deeper gifts is exactly that. And you never know when you're going to find that deeper gift. It could happen decades later, decades.
Elizabeth, was this thing that, those wonderful consultants from Insight helped you, bring this side of yourself? Was that like that for you, the finding the deeper gift?
Yes, ultimately. At first, it was like unleashing the dam, to tell you the truth. It was a very big, powerful thing to
Wow.
be able to just say, oh, you mean I can actually be my full self, not just part of myself?
Huh.
And you think that's going to work? So it was really unleashing a lot of, if you can imagine, after years and years of operating in a particular way. And
Wow.
then suddenly having, not only permission, but almost imperative to do it. Yeah, that was quite I'd say it probably was a good 6-month, year-long process to process it fully and start to really feel comfortable with that.
Wow. That's quite a story.
So yeah.
Finding your deeper gift might involve floods and fear.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
All right, that's a good tee up for me to this. Well, this is part of my journey here is I would identify myself as a spiritual person and have for my whole adult life, but I've kind of kept it out of my work world, and that's changing, Elizabeth. Partly through some relationships, like maybe the ones you had, that are kind of pushing me in a helpful way to just be like more my full self. And I've organized this conference 3 years in a row. This is going to be the 4th year. Get together and have this conversation about the relationship between these two things that are very meaningful to me: spirituality and family health. And I want to invite you all to come and sit alongside with us and enjoy the conversation. And I'll mention that Ernie Pomelo, the guy on the left there, I have a interview show with him that was in this space, in the leader site space, about his journey with death and learning through loss and having his spirituality deepened through loss. I mentioned that it's on YouTube. So this just slide showing you that these things are available on YouTube. And I also want to say, I didn't mention this, that coming up, speaking of, This woman, Marion, is somebody who did my course, my Leading by Managing Self course quite a few years ago. We've stayed in touch. I think she's very impressive. She and her husband are entrepreneurial. They started a surgery center business, and she just kept growing and has run surgery center teams of nurses and surgeons who do surgery all day long for decades. She's a great person with tremendous wisdom. And also, she lost her home a number of years ago in the Northern California fires, lost everything she owned. So she's got an interesting story about resilience and the lessons of that. And we'll be getting into that when we talk together in a few weeks here. Would love to have any of you with us. Well, we're at our end of our time. Elizabeth, it was so nice to have you on here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you everybody for participating. Really enjoyed it.
Was it
Thank you.
enjoyable? Was it kind of scary? Was it enjoyable? What would you
Oh,
say?
no, it was fantastic. I knew I was in for a ride. It was great. It was great. Thank you so much. Really enjoy meeting people.
See you guys.
Thank you.
Bye, Amanda.
Best of luck to everybody.
Bye, Jeanette.
Take care.
Bye, Mary Beth.
you.
See you, Tom.